Everyone has heard the story of the enlightenment of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha. But one part of the story is not always well known by Westerners, and this is the Buddha's battle with Māra. So Māra is this demon, deity, entity, ruler, if you will, that challenged the Buddha for his enlightenment. And the reason this is so important, we have this actual entity, Māra, but we also have what's inside us, Māra in our brain, our mind, that's preventing us from achieving enlightenment, realizing nirvana. So there's two important aspects to the story. There's the religious, historical context, and then there's also the practical context. When we practice Buddhism, we are battling Māra ourselves all the time. We're just not always aware of Māra. So there's lots of ins and outs with the Buddha and Māra and Siddhartha and Māra, but I'm going to go right 2,600 years ago, where Siddhartha Gautama is under what we now call the tree of enlightenment, or the Bodhi tree, and he is just become awakened. He became enlightened, and this is where Māra, Māra's entire goal is to ensure that we continue in this forced cycle of rebirth, in these 7 realms of rebirth, samsara. And he wants that to continue. That's his goal. So if you look at Māra and what Māra is, look at him as almost like the opposite of a Buddha, or a negative Buddha, or an anti-Buddha. He is not a Buddha. He wants to make sure we are remaining ignorant, that we are creating these karmic actions, that we are craving, desiring, attaching to things. He wants that to occur. So he's takes many different shapes and forms and actions, and whether he's disguised as different things or we see as natural phenomena, this is Māra. Māra is here to make us fearful, to make us cling and crave and lust and desire and everything, so that we give rise to these karmic actions that keep us trapped in rebirth. So with Siddhartha, Māra has a problem. Māra is well aware of what Buddhas are, because there have been many Buddhas in the past before Siddhartha Gautama. So he's just become enlightened. And Māra has not found a weakness with Siddhartha yet to try to make him not become enlightened. So he's in a little bit of despair here. He does not want this to occur, because what he wants is to keep even Siddhartha inside a cycle of rebirth. He doesn't want to have him teach any of these other people how to escape the power of Māra. So his 3 daughters, 3 beautiful daughters, go, we'll get him off this path. We will make sure that he is no longer going to be enlightened, that he will come back under your power, basically. So these 3 beautiful daughters of Māra, and in Buddhism, they're usually referenced as some of the things that we're trying to not have inside our Buddhist path that leads us to enlightenment. So like, we don't want to have desire, lust, and craving, and all these different things. So these 3 beautiful daughters go there and try to lure and to just kind of like distract and have Siddhartha cling and crave to them, right? And they're very beautiful, but Siddhartha is not fazed by this. He is not in any way lustful or desiring or clinging to them, because he sees them for what they are. All conditioned phenomena, according to the Buddha, are impermanent. So we are always changing, we are impermanent, and he sees us. He sees right through them. So the physical beauty and all these things that they're doing, that's not fazing him whatsoever. He sends them on their way. So this really distresses Māra. He's like, what can I do next? Now, Māra is very powerful in his own right. So he has this entire, essentially, demon army, if you will. And they go all out to go and attack the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. And so they are throwing weapons at him and everything else. And you see things, for example, like maybe arrows are turning to flowers. And what's going on here, right? So all these fearful, scary, demonic, if you will, looking entities and scary things are coming at Siddhartha, but he's still sitting there in his meditative pose, unaffected by what's going on around him. That, for us, we would be terrified, but Siddhartha, no. He's seeing the true nature. He sees what's going on at a fundamental level. We see Māra riding this large beast of an elephant, and he's throwing like this round weapon at the Buddha, but it doesn't hurt or attack the Buddha. It becomes sort of like this cover for him, this flowered cover. So we're seeing that the Buddha is not affected by these weapons, not affected by this army, not affected by Māra. So no matter what's being thrown at him and attacked with him, he is not affected by them. And this is distressing Māra even more, because if Siddhartha is able to succeed, he's going to be able to tell others how to achieve enlightenment, how to realize nirvana, which means that Māra has no power over them. They are no longer enforced rebirth in a samsaric cycle. So he plays a little mind games with the Buddha. He goes, who are you to think that you are the rightful owner of that seat of enlightenment that you're on right now? This is interesting because he tried to sow doubt inside the Buddha. And so he has plenty of witnesses around him, which is his army. So he says, I have witnesses, and his army goes like, yes, we claim witness that Māra is the rightful owner, the rightful ruler of that seat of enlightenment that you're on, not you. And so Māra, continuing with the mind games, goes, who speaks for you? Now remember, there's nobody around Siddhartha, nobody around the Buddha, no one's around him. He's just there by himself, facing his army, facing Māra. And so this was a very interesting part of the story. So he's in this meditative pose, right? He still has one of his hands in a meditative pose, but he takes the other hand, and you probably have seen statues this way, where he has it towards the ground, and his fingertips are touching the ground. And depending upon Buddhist art, sometimes it's touching the ground, sometimes not. But he touches the ground and he goes, the earth is my witness. And then this large earthquake actually occurs, which terrifies this demonic army of Māra, which flees because like, whoa, he has the entire world speaking witness for him that he's a true rightful heir, owner of that seat of enlightenment. Māra is seeing he's defeated. I mean, how can you compete against that? Goes away. And thus Siddhartha goes on to become the Buddha. And so we think the story kind of ends right there, but there's two important parts before I kind of continue. Why wasn't the Buddha affected by any of this? Because he saw Māra. He saw through Māra. He saw the truth about Māra. So these tricks, these games, these deceptions, disguises, mind games, doesn't work on the Buddha because he has become enlightened. And so he could not go back to not becoming enlightened. It's like actually being able to see through a dirty window for the first time, clearly seen out there. You're like, I know what that shadow is now. It was just a tree hitting against the window. You're awakened to that truth, even if that window is covered up again. You know what it is. So there's no way to kind of going back to not being enlightened. So there was no way that his daughters could ever tempt him back. There's no way this army could ever scare him back. There's no way Māra could have ever tricked him back. So he saw Māra, and it just cut through him. That was the supreme power against Māra. He saw Māra. He saw Māra's games. So he goes on to become the Buddha, and as we kind of proceed with the Buddha's life and his teachings, we see that Māra didn't go away, because Māra, remember, is powerful in his own ways. And so he can't really do anything to the Buddha, but he could do things to other people. So he would go ahead and even show himself as the Buddha to try to trick his followers and give them false teachings. And this is where you also see like one of the Buddhist arhats, the followers, enlightened people, goes, that's not the true teaching, because he understood what a true teaching of the Buddha was. So that scared away Māra as well. But he was also at that time, he was kind of tempting other people. He was tricking other people. So we have to see through this deception and trickery of Māra, in not just his, in the Buddhist religion, his physical form, the actual entity, but how we perceive things, how we practice Buddhism. Are we tempted to our phones, to a movie, or to just being lazy, that we don't want to practice Buddhism every day, or we don't want to do this or that, or that we become blind to these different situations that we have in our everyday life? We can just go, Māra, 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 I see you, Māra, and go and employ our Buddhist practices and tactics to counter Māra. And that's what we need to do. So that's where you see things such as The 5 precepts are so important. That's the counter Māra. You see generosity, compassion, loving kindness. Counter Māra, counter these different things that Māra does to us, right? And we want to have that wisdom because we want to see what Māra really is. We want to see why we have these 3 poisons, 3 fires. We want to see these things so we don't have these karmic actions that keep us trapped in rebirth. Because that's what Māra wants. Māra wants us to fuel the 3 fires of greed, anger, and ignorance. He wants us to do that because that is keeping us inside the cycle rebirth. The absence of the 3 fires is nirvana. It's the extinguishment of the 3 fires. Māra doesn't want that. So we even see later on in the story of the Buddha, where the Buddha comes across, it looks like this, old farmer, kind of, but it's Māra. So Māra is using disguises and tricks. He can also do natural phenomena. So it's not always going to be like this entity or being. He can play mind games with us, as we saw with the Buddha. There's different things that Māra does. Now, whether you believe Māra was an actual entity or not, in the Suttas, there's nothing where the Buddha was basically saying, this is just my analogy for this or that. He's describing it as it was. So we can take it 2 different ways. Yes, an actual entity. But if you don't want to do that, absolutely look at it as we are engaging with quote unquote Māra all the time. Our laziness, our lack of wisdom, all these things that relates to the Buddhist path, we have to be very well aware of that because, and you may do this now, I do it, like I see you Māra, but we don't always see Māra. But when we don't see Māra is when he has control over us. We want to be aware of Māra, see Māra in these situations and thinking and people and what's going on around us. Not so much as if that is truly Māra, yes or no, but we want to go, how are we reacting to that? How are we interpreting that? Are we creating karmic actions based upon that? Are we not practicing Buddhism because of that? This is important for us. So Māra, to me, is sometimes a little part of the entire Buddhist religion and all the teachings. But when we look at it as part of our Buddhist practice, I feel Māra is great in this regard because we can look at it as a focus of our practice as well. We want to see Māra just like the Buddha did. And because the Buddha could actually see Māra in all his disguises and all his tricks and all his mind games, Māra didn't have any power over the Buddha. That is truly empowering and liberating for us as we think about our faith inside Buddhism. Do you have any questions about Māra? I would love to hear from you in the comments below, and I'll talk with you in our next episode. Thank you.